this matters is because if he has monuments that were erected for him and he turns out to be pro-slavery, then that definitely sends a very bad message, right? Whereas if Robert E. Lee is shown to be an anti-slavery person who just decided to fight as the general in the Civil War because his state went with the Confederacy, then that may tell a different story. So you will have to decide. I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm just going to read it and help you to understand what's being said, and then you decide what you think. All right, so I'm just going to read some of the highlighted sections of this first one. This is to his wife, Mary Custis Lee, who was I think the great-granddaughter or the granddaughter of George Washington. I don't remember which. On December 27th, 1856. So this is before the Civil War. This is private correspondence to his wife, where you would hope he would say what he really feels. So we have, in this enlightened age, there are few, I believe, but will acknowledge that slavery as an institution is a moral and political evil in any country. So, according to this line, he seems to be saying all would agree that slavery is bad. Okay, and he's saying it's a moral and political evil. It is useless to expatiate on its disadvantages. I think it, however, a greater evil to the white man than to the black race. And while my feelings are strongly enlisted on behalf of the latter, my sympathies are more strong for the former. So here he seems to be saying he is more sympathetic to the white man's role in slavery than to black people. Okay? The blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. So with this one, he is saying, in his mind, he believes black people in America are better off even as slaves than they would be in Africa. Now, one thing to think about. Would it really be better to be a slave than to be in what was your ancestors or your home country, depending on when you or your relatives were taken across through the Middle Passage? It's just something to think about. How long their subjugation may be necessary is known and ordered by a wise, merciful providence. So he's saying only God knows. Only God knows how long. Only God knows how long they will be in slavery. That's another thing to think about. Who is it that started slavery? Their emancipation will sooner result from the mild and melting influence of Christianity than the storms and tempests of fiery controversy. So he thinks that in time, with the influence of Christianity, slavery will end, but that may take a long time. He's saying it'll sooner result from that than it will from storms and tempests of fiery controversy. So he's saying, let's let it run its course and let Christian feeling kind of gradually erode slavery, rather than having these abolitionists come in and demand that slavery end now. That's what he's saying. While we see the course of the final abolition of human slavery is onward, and give it the aid of our prayers and all justifiable means in our power, we must leave the progress as well as the results in His hand who sees the end, who chooses to work by slow influences and with whom 2,000 years are but a single day. So again, he's saying, let's leave it to God to end slavery. One day. Not one day soon, but one day. Then he goes on and he says, although the abolitionist must know this and must see that he has neither the right or power of operating except by moral means and suasion, meaning persuasion, and if he means well to the slave, he must not create angry feelings in the master. So he's basically saying abolitionists need to back off and find another way. And in his mind, that means leave it up to God. Because what they're doing now meaning in the mid-1800s, is making bad feelings with masters. So bad feelings with white men in the South who owned slaves. So what do you think Lee's opinion of abolitionists was, according to this so far? Think about that, and what makes you think so? That although he may not approve the mode which it pleases Providence to accomplish its purposes, the results will nevertheless be the same, that the reasons he gives for interference in what he has no concern holds good for every kind of interference with our neighbors when we disapprove of their conduct. So he's comparing it to when nosy neighbors get involved and stick their noses in where they don't belong. He's saying abolitionists need to mind their own business and stay out of it. Okay? And then he says, still I fear he will persevere in his evil course. So, he's referring to abolitionists, saying that he's afraid they will continue to do this evil course or evil work, bad work. So, based on that letter, what do you think? Do you think that Robert E. Lee was pro-slavery or anti-slavery? What would you use to support your thinking? Okay, so this next letter is written to his son during the time of the Battle of Fredericksburg on January 11th, 1863. So a little bit of background on this that you need to know. There was a will, because basically Lee's father-in-law his last name is Custis. Okay, so he was related to Martha Washington, whose maiden name was Custis. Okay, so father-in-law Custis dies, and then there's a dispute over his final wishes. So what did Custis want done with his slaves after his death? That's the big question. Some people say that Custis, upon his deathbed, ordered that his slaves be freed, and that it was an understanding that his slaves said, hey, he wanted us to be free. Other people say that no, according to the will, it said in the will that within 5 years, his slaves were to be freed after his death. Okay? Not at 5 years, but within 5 years. So let's take a look and let's see. He's writing to his son. This is Lee. I executed a deed of manumission embracing all the names sent me by your mother and some that I recollected. But as I had nothing to refer to but my memory, I fear many are omitted. So, manumission. Okay, that's when you grant slaves their freedom. So he's saying that he went ahead and he freed these slaves with all the names that were sent to him. Okay, so there were a list of names that were sent. And there were 70-some slaves that were originally owned by his father-in-law that he was then in charge of for 5 years. Then he goes on, it was my desire to manumit all the people of your grandfather, whether present on the several estates or not. They owned 3 houses, by the way. I believe your mother only sent me the names of those present at the White House and Romancoke. These are 2 of the estates that they had in Virginia, some of which were inherited by his father-in-law. I don't remember which. And then there's also Arlington House that also had slaves that Lee was in charge of. Those that have left with the enemy may not require their manumission. So he's saying some slaves that escaped, they left with the enemy, they went with the Union, they may not require manumission or their freedom because they've already escaped and they're already free. Still, some may be found hereafter in the state, and at any rate I wish to give a complete list and to liberate all, to show that your grandfather's wishes so far as I was concerned had been fulfilled. So he's saying, regardless of whether they escaped or not, his intention at this time, and this is 5 years after his father-in-law's death, his intention at this time is to have a full list of slaves to be freed. Now, one question you might ask yourself is he doing this out of duty because it says to in the will and he has to, he feels it's his duty, or is he doing this because he wants to? You would have to read into the text to decide. Do you not think that this is the best course? If you can get the complete list, you can either have a deed drawn up embracing the whole, or a supplementary deed embracing those who have been omitted. So he's saying we can add to this list later on if we need to. We can supplement if we need to. Stating that they had been carried off from the plantations by the enemy. Okay, so that is the second letter. So again, your job is to decide, was Lee in favor of slavery? Was he opposed to slavery? What do you think based on the information that you've got here? Is this enough information to decide whether he was in favor or opposed to slavery? And then finally, we have this testimony from Wesley Norris, and Wesley Norris is a former slave of his father-in-law.